One quiet afternoon last winter, I sat on my porch watching the world slow down. The air was crisp and the street was still except for Mrs. Eleanor, a 76-year-old widow who lived across the way. She was sitting at her small garden table, a cup of tea steaming beside her, staring at an old photo album. Her hands traced the edges of the pages and her eyes held a softness that made me pause. Curious, I walked over and asked what she was looking at. She smiled a little wistful and said, "These are my kids when they were small. I haven't heard from them in a while." Her voice was steady, but there was a weight behind it, a quiet ache that I think you might understand. Maybe you felt it too, that moment when the phone doesn't ring, when the house feels too empty, when you wonder if you're still part of your family's story. I used to think I was too old to change the way things were, that after 60 or 70 the distance between you and your loved ones was just part of life. But Mrs. Eleanor taught me something that day, something that changed how I see growing older. She wasn't just looking at those photos to remember the past. She was searching for a way to bring her family back into her present. I pulled up a chair and we talked as the afternoon faded. She told me how her children used to call every Sunday like clockwork. Their voices filled her home with laughter, stories, questions about her day. It was her anchor, her proof that she was still the heart of their world. But over the years those calls grew shorter, then rarer. Months would pass with only a quick text or a brief visit. She didn't blame them. She knew they had jobs, families of their own, worries she remembered from her own younger days. But deep down there was a loneliness, not from being alone but from feeling forgotten. I asked her why she didn't reach out more. Her eyes flickered with hesitation. "I don't want to bother them," she said. "I'm afraid they'll think I'm needy or that I can't handle things on my own." Her words stayed with me because they felt so familiar. If you've ever held back from calling your children or grandchildren, worried you'd be a burden, you'll know exactly what she meant. Mrs. Eleanor wasn't alone in this. I've met so many people over 50, 60, 70 who feel this quiet drift. It's not that love is gone, but life pulls everyone in different directions. Children move away, grandchildren grow up, and suddenly the moments that used to hold you together, dinners, holidays, long talks, start to fade. The scariest part is how it sneaks up on you. You don't notice when the calls stop or when the visits become rushed. You tell yourself it's normal, that it's just aging. But here's the truth nobody tells you: your family ties are often the first thing to weaken as you grow older. Before your steps slow, before your energy shifts, it's the closeness with those you love that starts to slip. And if we ignore it, that distance can grow into something heavier: loneliness, isolation, a sense that you're no longer needed. But it doesn't have to be that way. There are simple, heartfelt steps you can take right now to pull your family closer, to make your heart feel full again. I still remember the way Mrs. Eleanor's face lit up when she told me she decided to do something. She wasn't going to wait for her children to call. She wasn't going to let the silence win. That photo album wasn't just a relic, it was her starting point. She said, "I'm going to remind them I'm still here and I still love them." Not by demanding their time, but by opening my heart in small, meaningful ways. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low, I listened to her story and I realized she was onto something powerful. Growing older doesn't mean stepping back. It means living with intention, with love and rhythm, with who you are. Maybe you've wondered too, how do you hold on to the closeness with your family when time and distance seem to pull you apart? Mrs. Eleanor's story isn't just hers. It's the story of so many people who feel the ache of fading connections, but refuse to let it define them. I asked her if I could share what she'd learned, not just because it moved me, but because I believe there's someone out there, maybe you, searching for a way to mend those quiet rifts, to love again, to feel less alone. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 5 simple ways that people like Mrs. Eleanor have used to bring their families closer, to make their hearts beat and sync again. These aren't rules or quick fixes. They're moments, lessons, stories I hope will spark something in you. Before we dive in, I want to ask you to do one small thing. If you've ever felt that distance with your children or grandchildren, leave a comment below saying "I understand." It lets me know this story is reaching the right people. And if you haven't subscribed to Elderly Wisdom yet, hit that button to join us as we explore ways to live more beautifully every day. As the light faded that afternoon, I stayed with Mrs. Eleanor, listening as she spoke of her plan to reconnect, starting with a single step that changed everything. Let's step into her journey together, beginning with the moment she decided to open her heart. As the afternoon light softened, I sat with Mrs. Eleanor, her garden table now scattered with a few loose photos from her album. The air was cool and her tea had gone cold, but her eyes were alive, searching as if the memories in those pictures were whispering back to her. I could still see her hands gentle but firm holding a photo of her daughter as a child laughing on a swing. She told me she hadn't spoken to her in months, not because of any fight, but because life had pulled them apart. Maybe you felt it too, that quiet drift when the people you love feel like strangers, not because they've stopped caring, but because the moments that once held you together have slipped away. I used to think I was too old to bridge that gap, that after 60 or 70 you just accept the silence. But Mrs. Eleanor showed me something different that day. She wasn't just holding on to those photos for comfort. She was finding the courage to start again. I asked her what she meant when she said she'd remind her family she was still here. She leaned back, her smile both tender and resolute, and said, "I'm going to write to them, not to complain but to tell them I miss them. I want them to know I'm still their mother, still their grandmother, even if I'm not at the center of their lives anymore." Her words hit me because they were so honest, so raw. If you've ever sat alone wondering if your children still need you, you'll understand. There's a fear in reaching out, a worry that you'll seem weak or demanding. But Mrs. Eleanor wasn't afraid anymore. She was ready to open her heart, and that was the first way she taught me to reconnect, not by expecting others to change, but by letting your feelings lead the way. She told me about the first letter she wrote sitting at that same table the next morning. It wasn't long, just a few lines to her daughter. "I miss hearing your voice," she wrote. "I made your favorite lemon cake yesterday. Call me when you can." Her hand trembled as she sealed the envelope, not because she was nervous, but because it felt like a step into the unknown. I asked her why she didn't just call. She said, "Writing gave me time to find the right words to say I love you without asking for anything back." I still remember her voice, steady and warm, as she described that moment. It wasn't about the letter itself, but what it did for her. Writing helped her untangle the ache in her heart, the fear of being forgotten, and it gave her clarity. She realized her daughter wasn't pulling away on purpose. Life was just loud, and her small note was a way to cut through the noise. Maybe you've held back from saying how you feel, worried it would stir things up or make you seem needy. I thought of my own mother, how she used to stay quiet when I didn't visit, not because she was angry but because she didn't want to intrude. One day she sent me a card, just a few words: "I was thinking of you today." That simple gesture made me pick up the phone and call her, and we talked for hours. If you've ever received a message like that from someone you love, you'll know how it feels, like a door opening, a reminder that they're still there. Mrs. Eleanor's letter had the same effect. A week later her daughter called, and they spoke for nearly an hour about nothing and everything, the way they used to when her daughter was young. It wasn't a grand reunion, but it was enough. Enough to make Mrs. Eleanor feel seen again. She said that first step, opening your heart, doesn't have to be a letter. It can be a text, a short voicemail, even a few words when your children visit. The key is to move past the fear of being too much, to let your love speak, even if it's just a whisper. I can still see her face as she told me, "I didn't write to change them, I wrote to remind myself I'm still worthy of love." Those words stayed with me because they reminded me that love at any age starts with believing you deserve it. If you're over 50, 60 or 70, you might think it's too late to say what's in your heart, but Mrs. Eleanor would tell you it's never too late to start. Her story didn't end with that letter. After finding her voice, she realized love isn't just about words. It's about creating moments where love can grow. She began to think about ways to bring her family together, not by asking for their time, but by giving them a reason to come back. As the evening settled around us, I listened to her talk about the next step. She took a step that filled her home with laughter again. Let's keep walking with her into the moments where her heart began to beat in rhythm with her family's once more. The evening was settling in now, the air carrying a faint chill as I sat with Mrs. Eleanor, her garden table bathed in the soft glow of a lantern. The photos were tucked back into her album, but her hands were busy now, stirring a small pot of soup she'd brought out to share. The smell of herbs and warmth filled the space, and I could see her eyes brighter than before, as if the act of remembering had lit something inside her. She told me about the letter she'd sent to her daughter, the one that brought them closer after months of silence. But she didn't stop there. She said words are just the beginning, love needs a place to grow. Maybe you've felt it too, the way a single conversation can spark hope, but it's the moments you share, the laughter, the clinking of spoons, that make love feel real again. I used to think I was too old to bring my family together, that after 60 or 70 those gatherings were for someone else's home. But Mrs. Eleanor showed me that day that a table, even a small one, can be the heart of a family. I asked her what she meant by giving her family a reason to come back. She smiled, her hands pausing over the soup, and said, "I decided to invite them over just for dinner, nothing fancy, just us. I wanted them to feel home again." Her voice was steady, but there was a tremor of excitement in it, like she was sharing a secret she'd only just discovered. If you've ever longed for the days when your house was full of voices, when every meal was a story you'll understand. There's something about sitting together, about passing a plate, that weaves hearts closer. But for Mrs. Eleanor, it wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about creating something new, a moment where her children and grandchildren could see her not just as a mother or grandmother, but as a woman still full of love to give. She told me about that first dinner plan with a kind of careful hope. She was nervous, her hands shaking as she set the table, worried they'd be too busy, or that it wouldn't mean as much to them as it did to her. She didn't have much, just a small apartment and a tight budget, but she made it work. She cooked her daughter's favorite vegetable soup and baked a simple apple tart her grandson loved. The table was old, the chairs mismatched, but she set it with care, leaving an extra place just in case. I still remember her laugh as she described it. I wasn't sure they'd come, but I cooked like they would. That was the second way she taught me to reconnect, not by waiting for others to reach out, but by creating a space where love could bloom. Maybe you've hesitated to invite your family over, thinking it's too much work, or that they won't show up. I thought of my own mother, how she'd stopped hosting after my father passed because she felt her home wasn't enough. But one day she invited us for tea, just tea, and we ended up staying for hours laughing over old stories. If you've ever sat around a table with the people you love, you'll know it's not the food that matters, it's the feeling of being together. Mrs. Eleanor's dinner wasn't perfect. Not everyone could make it, but her son and grandson came. They sat around that small table eating soup and tart, and for the first time in years her home felt alive. She said it wasn't a miracle, but it was enough. Enough to remind her that her family still wanted to be near her. They just needed a moment to remember why. She said the secret isn't in what you serve, but in the love you pour into it. You don't need a big house or a fancy meal. A pot of soup, a plate of cookies, even a cup of tea can be enough if it comes from the heart. If your family lives far away, she said, send them a small batch of something you've made with a note, I thought of you. Those gestures carry a message, you're still here, still loving, still waiting. I can still see her eyes twinkling as she told me about that night, how her grandson's laughter echoed through the room, how her son stayed late to help with the dishes. It wasn't just a meal, it was a bridge, a way to bring her family back to her. I asked her how to start, especially if it's been years since the family gathered. She said, keep it simple. Invite them for something small, a coffee, an afternoon snack. Don't worry about making it perfect, just make it yours. Her story made me realize that growing older doesn't mean waiting for others to come to you. Sometimes you have to set the table, light the spark, and trust that love will follow. And from that dinner, Mrs. Eleanor began to see something more. She wanted to do more than gather her family. She wanted to understand them, to hear their hearts. As the night grew quiet, I listened to her talk about the next step. She took a step that deepened her connection in ways she never expected. Let's keep going with her into the moments where listening became her way to love even more. The night was deepening now, the lantern's glow casting soft shadows across Mrs. Eleanor's garden table. The soup pot was empty and the air was quiet save for the faint rustle of leaves in the breeze. I could still see her face warm and open as she spoke about that dinner, the one that brought her son and grandson back to her table. It wasn't just the food or the laughter that stayed with her. It was what happened after, when her son lingered, his hands drying a plate, his voice low and hesitant. He started talking about his life, the long hours at work, the worries about his own children, the weight he carried but rarely shared. Mrs. Eleanor didn't interrupt, didn't offer advice. She just listened, her eyes steady, her heart open. When he finished, he looked at her and said, thank you, Mom, for letting me talk. Maybe you felt it too, that moment when someone you love opens up, and you realize how much they need you to simply be there. I used to think I was too old to understand my children's world, that after 60 or 70 their lives were too different too fast. But Mrs. Eleanor taught me that love doesn't need to keep up, just needs to listen. I asked her why that moment felt so special. She leaned forward, her hands clasped, and said, when I listened, I wasn't just their mother, I was their friend. It was like giving them a safe place to land. Her words sank deep because they were so true. If you've ever wished your children would share more, but worried you wouldn't know what to say, you'll understand. There's a distance that grows not from lack of love, but from feeling like you're on different pages. After 50 or 60 or 70, their world, jobs, technology, stresses can feel like a language you don't speak. But Mrs. Eleanor showed me that listening is a language of its own, one that doesn't require you to have all the answers. That was the third way she taught me to reconnect, not by fixing their problems but by giving them your presence. She told me that night in her kitchen changed everything. Her son hadn't opened up like that in years. By staying quiet, letting him speak, she created a space where he felt safe. He didn't need her to solve his worries. He needed her to hear them, to see him as more than just her son but as a man carrying his own burdens. I still remember her smile as she said he called me a few days later just to talk about nothing, a movie he'd seen, a funny thing his kid did. Those calls weren't out of duty. They were because he wanted to be close again. Maybe you've had a moment like that with your own family when a quiet conversation felt like a bridge, or maybe you've longed for it, but didn't know how to start. I thought of my mother when Mrs. Eleanor shared this. I'd call her sometimes after a hard day, and she'd just listen, her silence warm like a hug through the phone. It wasn't about her knowing my world, it was about her being there. If you've ever felt that ache to know your children better, to hear their stories, you'll know it's not about having the perfect words. It's about giving them room to share. Mrs. Eleanor said it starts with a simple question, one that doesn't push or judge. How's your day been? Anything fun going on? The key is to listen without jumping in, without trying to fix things. They don't need me to run their lives, she said. They need me to love them no matter what. I asked her how she learned to listen like that, especially when it's been so long since her family was close. She said it's like sitting still and letting the world come to you. You don't have to understand everything, just be there. Start small, she told me. Next time your children or grandchildren visit, ask them something small and really hear the answer. Don't rush to respond, just let their words settle. Her story made me realize that growing older doesn't mean you're out of touch. It means you have the wisdom to listen, the patience to let love unfold. And from those moments of listening, Mrs. Eleanor began to see something new. She wanted to be more than a listener, more than a mother. She wanted to be someone her family could feel connected to through small acts of care. As the stars came out, I sat with her, feeling the weight of her story, knowing it was leading us to something even deeper. Let's keep walking with her into the moments where a simple gesture became a way to love across generations. The stars were out now, pinpricks of light scattered across the night sky, and the lantern on Mrs. Eleanor's garden table flickered softly, casting a warm glow over her weathered hands. The soup pot was long empty, the photo album tucked away, but her voice carried a quiet energy as she leaned forward, her eyes bright with the memory of what came next. I could feel the weight of her story settling into me. Each piece a lesson in love, in refusing to let age or distance define her place in her family's heart. She'd written the letter that opened the door, hosted the dinner that brought laughter back to her table, and listened with a presence that turned her son's guarded words into a bridge. But there was more, she said, something smaller yet deeper that tied it all together. It's not just about the big moments, she told me, her voice soft but sure. It's about the little things you do every day to show them you're still here, still theirs. Maybe you've felt it too, that longing to be woven into your family's life. Not as a memory but as a living, breathing part of their present. I used to think I was too old to matter in the small ways, that after 60 or 70 my role was to step back. But Mrs. Eleanor taught me that night that love doesn't retire. It finds new ways to show up. I asked her what she meant by the little things. She smiled, her fingers tracing the edge of the table, and said, I started leaving traces of myself in their lives, tiny reminders that I'm thinking of them. Her words were simple, but they carried a truth that made me lean closer. If you've ever wondered how to stay connected when your children or grandchildren are miles away or caught up in their own worlds, you'll understand. There's a quiet fear that comes with aging, a worry that you'll fade from their minds, that your love won't reach them across the distance. But Mrs. Eleanor wasn't fading. She was finding ways to be present, to make her love felt in ways that didn't demand time or attention but lingered like the scent of her apple tart. That was the fourth way she taught me to reconnect. Not by asking for their presence, but by giving them yours in small heartfelt gestures that say, I see you, I love you, I'm here. She told me about the first gesture, a moment so small it almost felt insignificant at the time. A few days after that dinner, she was sorting through her knitting basket, pulling out skeins of soft blue yarn she hadn't touched in years. Her grandson, now 12, had mentioned during the meal that he was always cold at soccer practice. He laughed about it, she said, but I heard the need underneath. So she started knitting him a scarf, nothing fancy, just a simple pattern she could manage with her arthritic hands. Each stitch was slow, deliberate, a quiet act of love. When it was done, she wrapped it in tissue paper, tucked a note inside, for my favorite goalie, stay warm, and mailed it to him. I can still see her face as she described his call a week later. his voice crackling with excitement through the phone. "Grandma, I wear it every practice," he said. "The guys think it's cool." It wasn't just a scarf. It was a piece of her heart, a reminder that she was still part of his world. Maybe you've done something like that, sent a small gift or a note, and felt the warmth of knowing it landed. Or maybe you've held back, worried it wouldn't matter or that it's been too long. I thought of my own mother, how she'd slip a dollar bill into a birthday card for me even when I was grown, her way of saying she was still watching over me. Those gestures, small as they were, kept us tethered. Mrs. Eleanor's scarf was like that, but it wasn't a one-time thing. She started looking for other ways to show up. She'd text her daughter a photo of a flower from her garden with a quick, "This made me think of you." She'd mail her son a clipping from the newspaper about a local event he'd like with a scribbled, "Let's go together sometime." These weren't demands or expectations. They were gifts, quiet ways to say, "I'm still here loving you." I asked her how she knew what to send, especially when her family's lives felt so different from hers. She laughed, a soft sound that carried years of wisdom. "You don't have to know their whole world," she said. "You just have to notice them." She told me about watching her grandson at that dinner, how he fidgeted with his phone but lit up when he talked about soccer. She listened to her daughter's quick mentions of a stressful job and sent her a small packet of chamomile tea with a note, "For a quiet evening." "It's about seeing who they are now," she said, "not who they were when they were little." Her words hit me because they were so true. If you've ever felt out of touch with your grown children or teenage grandchildren, like their lives are a puzzle you can't solve, you'll know the ache she was addressing. But Mrs. Eleanor showed me that love doesn't need to understand every detail. It just needs to show up. Those small gestures started to weave her back into their lives. Her daughter began texting back, sometimes just a heart emoji, sometimes a quick story about her day. Her son called more often, not out of obligation but because he wanted to share a laugh or a memory. Even her grandson, busy with school and friends, started sending her photos of himself wearing the scarf, his grin wide and unguarded. I still remember her voice as she said, "It's like they're remembering me too." That was the magic of it. Not just that she was reaching out, but that her love was pulling them closer, reminding them of the bond they'd always shared. She said the key is to make it personal, to let your gestures carry your heart. It doesn't have to be knitting or baking. Maybe it's a voicemail singing a silly song your grandchild loves, or a bookmark tucked into a novel your daughter mentioned. If they're far away, send a postcard from your town with a line about your day. If they're busy, drop off a coffee at their workplace with a smile and no expectation of staying. "It's not about money or time," Mrs. Eleanor said. "It's about showing them they're still in your thoughts." Her story made me realize that growing older doesn't mean stepping out of the picture. It means finding new ways to stay in the frame, to let your love shine through the cracks of distance and time. I asked her how to start, especially if it's been years since you felt close. "Pick one person," she said, "and do one thing. Something small, something that feels like you." She told me about a friend of hers, another widow in her 70s, who started sending her grown son a weekly text with a single memory. "Remember when we built that snowman?" Those texts led to calls, then visits, then a closeness they hadn't had in decades. "It's never too late," Mrs. Eleanor said, her eyes steady on mine. "Love doesn't have an expiration date." As the night grew late, the lantern's flame wavered, and I felt the weight of her words settling into me. She wasn't just teaching me how to reconnect. She was showing me how to live with intention, to refuse to let age or silence win. But there was one more step, she said, one that tied it all together, one that made her feel not just connected but alive. "It's about sharing yourself," she said. "Not just your love but your story." She leaned back, her hands still, and began to tell me about the fifth way she brought her family close. A way that changed not just her relationships but her heart. The air was cool now, the kind of night that makes you pull your sweater tighter, but Mrs. Eleanor's voice was warm, carrying me into the final piece of her journey. "I realized," she said, "that my family didn't just need my love, they needed to know me." She told me about a day a few weeks after the scarf, when her grandson was visiting. He was sprawled on her couch, scrolling on his phone when he looked up and asked, "Grandma, what was it like when you were my age?" The question caught her off guard, but it opened a door. She started telling him stories about her first job at a diner, about sneaking out to a dance with her friends, About the time she fell in love with his grandfather. He listened, his phone forgotten, his eyes wide. "I didn't know you were cool," he said, and they both laughed. That moment wasn't just a conversation, it was a gift. A piece of herself she hadn't shared before. Maybe you felt it too, the way your own story, the years you've lived, can feel distant from the people you love. I used to think my past was irrelevant, that after 60 or 70 my children didn't care about who I was before I was their mother. But Mrs. Eleanor showed me that sharing your story isn't about nostalgia. It's about letting your family see you as a person, not just a role. That was the fifth way she taught me to reconnect. By opening up your life, your memories, your heart, and letting them step inside. She started small, telling her grandson one story at a time. Then at the next family dinner, she brought out her photo album. Not to dwell on the past, but to share the moments that shaped her. She told her daughter about the day she learned to drive, her son about the time she stood up to her boss. Each story was a thread weaving her closer to them. Her daughter started asking questions, her son shared his own memories, and soon they were trading stories, laughing, filling the room with a warmth that felt like home. "They saw me," she said, "not just as mom or grandma, but as Eleanor. And that made them want to be closer." I asked her how to start sharing, especially if you're not used to talking about yourself. "Pick one moment," she said. "Something that makes you smile. Tell it like you're telling a friend." She suggested writing it down first, maybe in a letter or a journal you share with your family. Or tell it over coffee when the moment feels right. "Your life is a treasure," she said. "Don't keep it locked away." Her words stayed with me because they reminded me that growing older isn't about fading. It's about shining, letting your story light the way for those you love. As the night ended, I walked home under those stars, Mrs. Eleanor's story alive in me. She'd show me 5 ways to reconnect. Opening your heart with honest words, creating moments like a shared meal, listening with presence, giving small gestures of love, and sharing your story. Each step was simple, but together they were a map to a fuller heart. If you felt that quiet ache of distance, know this. It's never too late to reach out, to love, to live. Pick one step, one person, one moment. Start where you are. Mrs. Eleanor would tell you that's enough.